Episode 1, Bitter Start. Alright, so this here is a commentary redo on the first part of Digimon World 4 100% run, single player. And I felt like this series sort of had a bit of a rocky start. I started it on a whim. And I was using a loaner computer at the time. The reason why it has that border there is to try and hide the fact that it's at a very low resolution. And at first I thought it was just because of the easy cap. You know, the original easy cap. I actually have one and I'm using it. Or I did for this recording. But the 10 Pentium 4 could only record it at low quality. And at first I didn't realize it was low quality because I mostly watched it in a small little box. And then when I uploaded it, I realized, oh, quality looks like shit. So yeah, that's why the border's there. It's to hide the fact that the Easy Cap also doesn't record at a native resolution. It records at its own custom resolution, which is 25 pixels by 25 pixels smaller than 1011p. I mean 1080p, which is just a mild annoyance. And I also found out that the 10 Pentium 4 could also actually do it at a higher quality. So in later episodes, the quality actually got better, especially in Season 2 when I actually had a computer that didn't corrupt the OBS files every 25 minutes. That's heavily complained about in all the original episodes. But I sort of wanted to redo this and sort of paint it more as a bit of a walkthrough or a series of advice if you do think about 100%ing this game. Or think about buying all the equipment to play this game again if you no longer have it. Also, these are also some of the only videos I had conversations in the comments. There's this one guy who was a little hurt. I was a little too hard on Season 4 and this game. But I was literally only stating the truth. The history of what happened. The reason why people didn't like him. The vast majority of people. Also, I'm going to mention this now. There's actually a technique in the game that should be able to be performed by the player, which is a Bla Bash Attack. It's where you attack in the middle of a bash at the right time. It is feasible on GameCube. Also, if you do plan to play this for yourself and get all the equipment and do it at home, I would heavily recommend the GameCube version. The PS2 version is the worst one of the lot. And I normally don't recommend Xbox as a means of playing retro games like this one. Because those tend to die on their own. So the GameCube, from what, in my experience, is probably the most reliable console to play this on. Because God only knows if we're ever going to get an HD remake of this game. As much of a dumpster fire it was in its day. I'm not joking. The short story of the stick is this game was literally made in 3 months, rushed to meet a video game tie-in with a direct-to-TV movie special of Digimon, which was all done in this glorious CG. I forget the name of it. But it's the one where Alphamon. It's literally the entire story of how Alphamon became the leader of the Royal Knights or something like that. I haven't seen it in a long time. But I do know it. It was one of the first to be actually good looking for something that was direct to TV and not movie theater. I've seen some of the animation myself, and I can definitely say that. But it will never get an English dub, unless there's this secret petition I haven't heard of floating about of fans wanting them to make an English dub of it. Don't know if that's going on. Oh, and the other thing with this little bit there, what you just saw there was actually the capture card taking about like 3 dumps in a row, deleting 30 seconds of footage at each dump. Or just flat out freezing, and if it froze too long, it would crash and corrupt the video that was captured there. But the thing is, like I said in Chapter 2, I want to keep as much as the original gameplay on screen as possible to prove that I'm not cheating, because there is actually a very easy to do item duping glitch that you can do in this game. And it's definitely one of those things that was overlooked in its rushed state. Yeah. It's actually pretty fucking stupid. Like, really. I can understand that they didn't have any bug testers, but any video game creator would at least test to see if the item transfer system wouldn't be exploited by not saving the game during item transfer. Before you transfer the item and then exit out without saving the fact that you've transferred the item. So you could actually clone items that way. But after playing the game, I realized, man, why would you? If you're playing the single player, you're going to actually be forced to grind a lot in this game. Mostly because of how the game is balanced. They pretty much balance the entire game on at least 2-player co-op and tag team strategy, where the person with the least amount of revive discs would be on frontline duty, and when he dies, one of the backliners, who is just sitting there waiting for him to die, goes over, revives him, and then that guy moves back to the back line, and then the other player attacks shit for a while until he dies. Yeah. And that's actually a viable strategy in every boss in the game, if you have more than one player. So, a lot of this game, if you don't overgrind and play single player, you're literally going to have to be forced to walk to through the entire dungeon again to have a chance at killing the boss that you cleared the entire dungeon of to kill and then failed. Also, the other thing is there's actually a bit of a Dark Souls-ish punishment, but it sort of is lost when you realize, oh, enemies don't drop bits often. They don't drop flat bits often. So, if you die, you drop all of the bits in your wallet, as well as 15% of your experience to the next level every time you die. And if you die before you can actually revive your dead body, you actually delete all the money that was in that wallet. But with the mechanics of the game, enemies don't drop coins that often. They're mostly going to be carrying weapons, which you can then sell for money. So it's really only there to punish you for forgetting to put money in the bank, which completely nullifies this argument. And the only thing you truly need to worry about is your experience to the next level, which in single player is highly valued, because that means, I have to do the last hour and 32 minutes of grinding again to get back up to the point I was just about to level up. But even then it's contradictory. And literally the entire start of any playthrough of this game from level 1 is literally just grinding the first 3 screens of Goblymons until you have enough resources to get gate discs and revive your dead corpse every now and again, and grind these boxes up here for free items. But like I was saying earlier, there's this skill that you're supposed to be able to do called a Bash Attack. And it essentially blocks and attacks at the same time. But it is feasible to do on the GameCube. But in pretty much every version of the game, it is... you need to do it at the speed of 5.2 femtoseconds or something like that. Because different consoles have different tick speeds, you know. So, what they had it on the computer before they programmed it for the other consoles was something like, half of a second. But when they ported it to consoles, the tick rates got mixed up, and oftentimes the tick rates in consoles are actually faster than normal computers, because they're actually overclocked computers, technically. So the tick speeds of average consoles are actually higher than the tick speed of an average computer. So, yeah. And like I said, a lot of the programming in this game is just a dumpster fire. And that's actually giving it some credit, because it's functionable enough to always manage to stay on fire. And the game progression is also the same way. It's just a giant dumpster fire. Like I said, it is... literally, the only thing I did was actually triple the video speed on these episodes here to lessen the amount of my commentary for, my voice sake. Because I'm not going to sit through here and actually sit through 5 hours of edited video accommodated over time. I'm just going to speed it up 3 times, talk over it, as well as remove the previous audio. But also sort of resetting the standard for the rest of the series. I can't remove the border of these for reasons. One of which is if I did, I would be left with a oddly cropped video. And that would only look good if it had the background and was zoomed out like this. So that, and it also doubles as a buffer to show what episode it came from. If the time slot wasn't good enough, if you skip through the video, you could most likely be able to tell which episode each clip is from. Because I did a different background for each episode. Also, you're pretty much going to want to get equip items as soon as possible, like the beast boards and that. They're not permanent by any means, but hey, it's better than naked. And the thing is, they literally give you literally at the very start of this game, yes, there's tutorials that do give you free items if you choose to grind in them until you get to that and get to a level that you can actually viably win battles, but that's cheating in my opinion, because it's technically not the game world yet. That and grinding 2 hours in the tutorial just didn't sound fun for a video. And yes, it is a viable option that you can only do before you even enter Death Valley. Also, in I think the previous session I recorded, which was Chapter 2 of this series, I pretty much went into an in-depth little rant of ranting rambles of how shitty the level names are in this game, and how unimaginable, how very little imagination went into them. And the other thing is, literally at the very start of the game, if you're playing single player, you do have the freebie items you get from the tutorial, but they're not guaranteed every time in the same manner. And the other thing is, if you build a game and the most viable option to start off in it is to grind the tutorial section for hours, is it a good game? Are you proud of yourself that players find it easier to grind the tutorial section for a couple of hours before they actually play the real game? And the game mechanics aren't that overly complicated? I can understand if it's a very complicated game and you replay the tutorial a couple of times so you're you're sure you get how the game works, but there's industry standards like, oh, if you want a first-person shooter, with SAD, mouse to look around, left button to shoot, right button to scope, middle button to scroll between your weapons, or the numbers at the top of the keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4. But controllers are different than keyboards, but the industry standard is actually relevant here because this game is pretty much everything but industry standard. To be honest, it does follow a lot of top and down video games that use controllers do, which is move around with the left stick, X button for attack, square for block. And the block option is almost pointless. You only add a block if you are making an in-depth game with dodge mechanics or incentivizations to block, like reflecting projectiles back at an enemy. That actually makes blocking fun. But in this game, it's literally invincibility frames only if you block an attack. But considering how this game loves to stack enemies on top of each other, good luck blocking. Oh, and bosses, their attacks can't be blocked. So, good luck trying to block those, because you can't. So the block button is useless. And I heavily recommend to play this game or, study it as a really good example of what not to do for a video game. All the ideas were good. Execution isn't. And that's the thing. That's actually pretty much the voice of a lot of the original Digimon games besides Digimon World 1. They took a very unique concept, did it well. It didn't have any outrudely game-breaking bugs or exploits. Did have a couple of mild annoyances, though. But once you learn how to play the game, it's actually pretty decent. I don't own a copy of it. But I can vouch that that game struck a chord with many people by combining the virtual pet genre of video games, which many people don't count as a genre of video games, but Tamagotchi, and hell, Digimon, the boy version of Tamagotchi, are actually some of the long-running and most popular LCD games ever created. So, combine that with RPG. And at the time, Pokemon had nothing on what that game accomplished. And this game, here in the West, was actually made to ride on the hype. But at the end of the day, either by a fault to itself or just shitty timing, it actually caused a recession in the Digimon IP. Mostly because the companies that were in charge of making these games lost their rights to do so because they didn't respect the IP or the artist's decisions and rules for his IP content. And they just sort of abused their privilege is the best way to say it, or shed completely on the hospitality of the owner. Episode 2, Copious' Deaths. And the other thing about these little chapters here is that originally, the original commentary mostly talked about sort of the long-going history of Digimon as a franchise. But it pretty much boils down to a gross mismanagement and abuse of IP licensing. Uh, you see, Digimon was not originally. I mean, it's not a traditional franchise like Marvel. It's what is known as an IP. This one guy made the entire concept of Digimon. It's all public, and anyone could buy a license to make something using this already established IP. And the deep lore of Digimon is all explained in, well, what I call the deep lore, which is the IP story. But, and in the anime, a lot of the anime was actually made by different story writers. They just followed the rules of the narrative of the deep lore or IP rules. But Season 1 of Digimon actually went over really well and actually increased the sales of Digivices, also known as a reskin of Tamagotchi. And then it became more than a fad. Matter of fact, it sort of became bigger than Pokemon for a little bit in Japan. And the main reason is they actually had death, and I mean both life and death, in the anime and in the game. Well, Tamagotchi. So they were actually a little more realistic and thus more in depth in the storytelling because there is always this looming factor that these main characters actually have a chance of dying at any minute if it wasn't due to plot armor. And in Digimon World 1, your partner could die of old age. Your partner could die due to you not taking him to the toilet enough. He could die from you not giving him enough sleep. He could die from being overfed, underfed, and everything in between. Colds, name it, it probably was a thing. But the original uniqueness of both Season 1 and Digimon World 1 was a huge contributor of its popularity, in that it, yes, did follow the, I mean, there's an evil bad guy every week plot, but it also had an overarching narrative that came together in 5 arcs in Season 1. Digimon World 1 pretty much had the same thing. They had different worlds within it, biomes, I mean. ecosystems, if you will. But coming from that high, the video game franchisees decide to make another video game, name it Digimon World 2, and try and sell it as a sequel when it wasn't a direct sequel at all. It was just, hey, we decided to make another Digimon game. Oh wait, we already called it Digimon World. Digimon World 2? So, and it was completely different from Digimon World 1. And Digimon World 1 is still probably one of the most unique gameplay styles ever explored into the game. I mean, in video games altogether. And then Season 2 came out of Digimon. But the problem with Digimon World 2 was its over-reliance on maze dungeons that were heavily built against the player in that you had to grind a lot in that game. And it didn't help that all the dungeons look exactly the same. Which is also the same problem with Digimon World 2. I know, World 4. Not enough area variety. Which is a huge problem. Yes, it had the illusion of such, but if you can't tell the first dungeon of this game from the second dungeon, or hell, even the fourth dungeon of the game, there's probably a problem with your design. But Digimon Adventure Season 2 also ran into a snag. They kept firing and rehiring different story artists who pretty much retconned the previous story that was going on to make their own story, which sort of leaves plot points that should have been explored further to sit and die. And the entire thing, the entire series suffered from the fact that they kept changing writers willy-nilly. So the story of the entirety of that anime wasn't actually continuative by any means. Meaning the beginning and end didn't feel like it was a straight line like it should have been, or the intended experience. So they completely failed on making a direct sequel to the original anime, just as much as the hopes of fans getting a direct sequel to Digimon World 1. But I'm going to be honest, how are you going to get better than probably the most unique video game experiences of all time? It was very revolutionary for its time. And it didn't have good story, but what it made up for was decent gameplay, puzzle solving, mini games, and the obvious. You don't play as a hero who saves the world. You play as the kid who cleans up after the hero. Yeah. And it's a very interesting dynamic. You take care of the hero of the story. Like he's my slightly dim-witted pet. Oh shit, he needs to take a shit. Where's the toilet? Oh no, no. We're 2 inches from the toilet. Ah, fuck. He shat all over the place. Oh well. I'm going to have to get a Skullcomon to clean up the shit later. Yeah. Probably the most unique dynamic in a video game uh, ever conceived. And it sort of led to uh, a memorable experience. So then, Digimon Season 3 comes along. And it became bigger than number 1. Definitely bigger than number 2 because they accidentally made a dumpster fire with that one. And they were pretty much running with the coals hot during that entire series. It wasn't made by the same writer as Season 1, but the story was actually better in some places than the original anime. Animation was definitely better because they could scoop money out of the IP fund for it. And video games. A lot of the video games were literally last minute parent traps. Oh, he really loves this show. I'll buy him this Digimon game. Oh, it's the sequel to that game he loves. I'll buy it. But Season 3 became one of the biggest in the history of the Digimon IP. And Digimon World 3 retrospective, it was probably, from what I played of it in an emulator, I found it to be worse than Digimon World 2. Now, the thing is, Digimon World 1 also has a steep learning curve. Digimon World 2 is simple, linear, and it actually does have a decent gameplay loop. Especially if you like games that are overly grindy, like Dungeon Quest Monsters. Because if you look at it like that, it literally plays exactly the same thing. Mix these two things, shit. Mix these two things, good. Yeah, fusion. So, the main problem with the entirety of Digimon World 3 was it was heavily cryptic, and it was literally, the best way to put it was a walking sim. And at times in the game, you actually had to literally walk back to the very beginning of the game to talk to a person, then walk all the way back to the end of the game where you just were to talk to a different NPC to initiate a cutscene, which would then tell you to go back to this place by name, not tell you where it was. So you either had to literally walk in between all of the screens in the game until you found the place you needed to be at, as well as talking to every NPC you find, or suck it up and look up a walkthrough. But at the time, there was no walkthrough because internet wasn't that relatively available yet. So not just anyone could make a walkthrough back then. So either A, had to opt into buying the book with your allowance to learn what the fuck you do next, Or the old-fashioned way, which was waste all of my ungodly hours that could definitely be better spent in a different game trying to find out what in the fuck I'm supposed to do, because I already put in 22 hours in this game, and I don't want to waste those 22 hours I put into this game. But yeah, that game, in my opinion, also was a dumpster fire. The story was actually better than the previous installment, which was Digimon World 2. But Digimon World 2's story also wasn't that good. Digimon World 1, its story was, cookie cutter, generic, but at least it had a story. Kid sucked into a different world, is given a pet he needs to take care of, which that pet's destined to save the entirety of the digital world. Kill the whatever Digimon trying to take over the world. Yeah, simple. And there wasn't that much character development whatsoever. But you had a rebuild a town, and that's one of the other things. It actually had progression and side quests that actually affected what you could do later on in the game. And every side quest you pick up was actually a time investment that could actually save time later on or give you perks that save time altogether. And was a really good balance in that effect. You could buy, at one point you can literally get a taxi service to fast travel, but it cost a little bit of money. Then you could take up the side quest to actually lower the price of future taxi rides. And essentially, it was one of the only games at the time that blended side quests with the main story. Probably still is. About the closest example would probably be Skyrim or Fallout. You can do every quest in that game. Doesn't affect the end story, but also gives you resources to make what you choose to do next easier. But in that game, everything felt like a perk. Time was literally your biggest resource because within roughly every 8 to 6 hours, your partner would die and regress back to an infant. And you had to start over with 10% stat carryover from your previous lives. Previous life. Which meant over time your partner did get stronger, but also opened up new possibilities for Digi-evolution paths. But enough of that game. So then Season 4 comes out. They decide to forego the original Digimon formula, which was... Oh, the other thing that Digimon Season 3 did right first. What it did right, they actually lowered the amount of characters and actually gave them character. It used to be, I forget how many was in the original series, but in the entirety of the original season of Digimon, they didn't actually have enough screen time for each and every individual character. So to solve this, just lower the amount of characters on screen at any given time, and thus put more investation into their character and overall growth arc to then make them real people. And that season actually did that very well. But at the end, they sort of tack on random characters as Digidestins, becoming the same amount of Digidestins as there was in season 1. But the caveat to that was a lot of the characters they tacked on at the end didn't do anything or contribute that much to the story. And they were just mostly a buffer to sort of fill in time, mostly, in certain junctions of the story. And next segment, I'm going to talk about Digimon World 4 more and Digimon World. Episode 3, Mammoth of an Ordeal. So, what Digimon Season 4 did was actually a dumpster fire again. They decided to take the tried and true establishment of the IP, which was kids and pets save the world, to kids become Digimon save the world. But, and as somewhat of a last minute tie into a fad where this anime called Kamen Rider and Power Rangers were becoming really popular. So they decided to try and copy that fad and plaster the Digimon IP name on top of it. But before that, a lot of the original ideas for the series was actually much better, and if they polished it, probably would have made a better series. The original concept was there's this gladiator tournament, and kids and other people would sort of take control over a Digimon avatar and fight. And each person made their own Digimon avatar. And they would fight in VR, gladiator style. But with biological nukes. Yeah, I would pay money for that. But, yeah. But that plan sort of fell through in favor for what we got, which was somewhat of a last minute knockoff of Kamen Rider. So, I've actually sat down and watched the entire series during the recording of part 1, and it was bad. Probably one of the worst Digimon anime I have ever seen, and that was probably ever made. And I haven't even gotten to the point where they decided to copy and paste this smart decision again, but I won't talk about that one yet. So season 4 literally took away one of the original components that made the series so popular, which was a better Pokemon clone. But the main problem to that was they literally took away one of the big mascot IPs of the entirety of the IP, which was digital monsters, and then shoehorned kids into becoming them Kamen Rider style. They had this actual CG transformation scene for it and everything. But they didn't actually have any animators who were good at choreographing fights. So, a lot of the time, it was literally 2 frames of animation with special attacks like lightning or tornado fingertips, or even pyro darts. And really, I know, I get that every Digimon should have a ranged ability, but that being his signature attack the vast majority of the time, with his design made literally to punch people in the face. Yeah, a lot of the choices they've done for that series just sort of makes you ask more questions than what we ever got answers for. Besides, it was a shitty idea. Now, Digimon World 4. Digimon Season 4 also had a very shitty story. Not that bad as other later seasons, but it definitely lasted longer than what was welcomed. Definitely. And, looking at the problems that it had, being able to take apart something and point out its problems or its flaws is actually a good thing because you like it enough to actually tear it apart. But the main problem with Season 4 was not just the fact that it didn't have good choreographing. The story was also kind of meh. And it just sort of overstayed its welcome over time. Also, everyone's favorite Digimon from that season was Neemon, which is still to this day a very popular Digimon meme. But we don't talk about memes too much here. But the problem with Digimon World 4, I go very in-depth in Chapter 2. But the main problems is it's heavily rushed, doesn't respect the time of the player, has shitty platforming segments which are literally, if you fuck up, you have to do the entire platforming section over again with 1 hit point. And a lot of the time they pile up enemies on both ends, and in order to actually enter the boss fight, you have to kill all the enemies. And in some sections, you actually need to backtrack through the platforming, hope you don't fall, so that you can kill the enemies on the other side of the platforming segment. But if you fall, you get spawned back at the beginning of the platforming segment, which is the place you want, but surrounded by enemies who instantly kill you. And probably the most aggravating point in this game to make people hate it more is the fact enemies actually have invincibility frames when you, the player, have very little ones and very little invisibility frames. Also, enemies also spam block a lot, which there isn't that much incentivization for the player to do so, and in most cases it's actually more advantageous to overlevel yourself and be able to tank every hit. But Digimon Season 4, the other problem with it, it's actually the only good anime adaptation of Lucymon. And the thing is, I also kind of hate it for that. And practically every Digimon series that has Lucymon in it? Well, it was a dumpster fire. So then we come to the end of that, and we have two very mediocre experiences that can both completely break what the game originally had, I know the entire franchise had going for it at that moment, and as jarring as a brick wall in the middle of a highway. And the creators decided to put a hiatus on the games for a bit as they completely rebuild the anime adaptation for a bit. And they actually did come out with a really good anime adaptation, and it's still today one of the best Digimon series, still one of the hardest ones to find, and that is Digimon World Data Squad. Digimon Data Squad, the series. And it became so popular, they actually made a direct, one of the only existing, actually the only existing game, which was a direct anime tie-in. So, yeah, the anime was actually that good that they decided to stop making the shitty knockoffs with Digimon names on them and actually make a really decent one of an alternative storyline from that of the anime. So not only did this have its own story, and the game have its own unique story from the source material that it was based off of, and was a completely unique experience from the anime, but the anime was also really good, well written, and they actually went out on all of the bibs and bobs for it. They actually had decent choreographing at most times, but it was still mostly the Digimon throwing out their special one-hit KO move against the enemy. It still followed the new enemy of the week with overarching story. And is probably the most unique and well-explained adaptations of Digimon ever made as well. And it also had its own lore somewhat separate from all the previous adaptations, and also went really well over in the United States. And it also helped that it was actually picked up by Disney this time for the dubbing. And Disney also literally had a JetX block completely dedicated to this. And it still today, I still say it's probably one of the best Digimon anime ever made. Has some of the best materials made from it. And then we get to the game. The game was a dumpster fire. Fully voice acted. Unique experience from the anime. Evolving a plot with the great 7 deadly Digimon sins bleeding into the real world and starting to try and take over the real world as they possess people and do very nasty things to both the real world and digital world. You know, that whole shebang and bob. Oh, did I mention that there was Satan in there? Yeah. But the problem was not the story or the fully voice acted. It's also the only Digimon video game that actually did have full voice acting until the PSP games. But with all of that, it actually completely made a completely new shitfuck of a mistake. You actually had the ability to digivolve into any of the Digimon you thought, like in the DS games. Also, in Digimon World DS, the characters from Digimon World Ds actually did make a cameo in that game. But an indirect cameo. It was not actually licensed for them to do that. They just decided to do it, and it stuck into the end of the game and became part of it. You know, that sort of thing. But they also brought over the video game to the United States before they brought over Digimon World Data Squad. But that's a slightly different story. So, the main problem with Digimon World Data Squad and how it became a dumpster fire was a mixture of trying to implement mechanics from Digimon World 1 into a JRPG turn-based RPG. And yes. So, every Digivolution that was in the game was actually locked behind hidden criterias unannounced to the player unless they actually looked at either a guide or shuffled through 52 different menus until they got to it. The one they wanted. But not only were there pretty much invisible criteria to Digivolve, but you also had a Digivolution queue, meaning if you unlocked multiple Digivolutions at once, it would put them in a queue and randomly select them and tell you that you can Digivolve. So whenever you Digivolved, it randomly select one from the queue, gave you that one until you did it again, until you ran out until you got caught up with the queue. Which this encouraged heavy grinding, trying to get the Digivolutions you want. Also, all the Digivolutions that weren't fully voice acted and had fully animated models were pretty much every other Digimon in the game besides the main protagonists, and they also didn't have any good stats at all. Only the main protagonist Digivolutions did. Which begs the question, why the fuck did he put in the other ones just besides to waste people's time? But not only did were the Digivolution mechanics not fully explained correctly, even in the tutorial, but your options in battle were not determined by MP, action points, or resources. They were actually completely dependent on the mood of your Digimon, and if you either pissed it off too much by using the same skill and it got bored, or it just didn't feel like it that day, you couldn't actually use the Digimon. And when I actually played it myself, I accidentally made Agumon literally cry and became ball baggy. And if you keep, for Agumon, one of his personality quirks is if you tell him not to fight or attack, he gets really sad and upset with you, which then makes him not want to attack. So it created a vicious cycle where the only way that I could get him to get out of the rut was to attack, but since he was so upset, he couldn't attack. And if I picked an option that wasn't an attack, it actually made him sadder. Thus making it less likely he would attack, and thus more likely it pissed me off and waste everyone's time. Uh, so it literally is probably one of the highest quality games ever produced in the Digimon IP. That isn't that one MMO just filled with fucking loot boxes every fucking 5 minutes. And that is heavily paid to win. And roughly is huge because it's banking in on nostalgia of adults who loved that IP. And they really want to play a Digimon game, but the only one that was fully available on PC was that game. Still is. And many people don't recommend it because it is a sad habit, if you will. I guess that's the end of this segment. Episode 4. Goblin Slayer reference here. So, yeah, now we're in Digimon Cross Wars series. Which was also a huge dumpster fire. If you notice a pattern here with the Digimon IPA, they hit big with an anime here, and then completely fuck over whatever momentum they had into the next one somehow. And I haven't seen Apocrymon yet, but from what I hear, it falls into the same pit hole that Digimon Cross Wars had. Essentially, Digimon Cross Wars can be relatively summed up by they decided to do the isekai. Wait, no. The genre of anime and live action film where people would suit up to fight monsters, but then call in a Megazord to finish the job when the monster became giant. Super flashy, a lot of explosions, real life choreographing. And actually not that violent because it was so over the top. There were explosions everywhere to make it more cartoony and less realistic. Those were the times. But they came to the realization, wait a minute, maybe we didn't copy the right part. We copied the live action choreographing, but we didn't have the resources to do that. So what if we increase the budget to live action choreographing, but focus on Megazords instead? Digimon Fusion Wars, or Cross Wars, or Fusion Battle. Depends on your localization preferences. I actually own a box set around here with the original Japanese dub on it with English subs. But the story can pretty much sum up in a couple of statements. A spoiler for Digimon Season 1. In the last arc, the Three Kings arc, I forget the exact names, but there were 4 big Digimon that took over different sectors of the digital world and then turned it into Spire to their respective kingdom, and their thrones sat on the top, and each big bad is a master of one of those zones. Water, machine, forest, and darkness, if memory serves correct. But take that concept, but split up the digital world into all of its little biomes: grasslands, ocean, lakes, swamp, deserts, and break up each and every place into its own individual arc that follows suit into a grander arc, actually breaking the evil villain of the day plot point and replaced it with each place was its own little chapter in a bigger story. Uh, but the pitfalls this ran into was shitty localization to Western audiences. For fuck's sakes, if you watch the English dub right now on Netflix, you'll see a lot of my gripes. I can actually sit through that series at all in English dub. Probably because I already watched it in Japanese dub, but I couldn't get past what they decided to censor, and they decided to do it for kids and censor everything that could possibly be something worth censoring. Hell, there's this one scene where they censor Pumpkinmon's axe and replace it with a giant green tumor. They just didn't use Photoshop to crop it out or anything. They just drew over it with green Sharpie like a 3-year-old. And it really shows, and they also try to add lines to make it look like a giant leaf. But no, it just looks like a giant green tumor. The other pitfalls with that was overinvestment in action figures. And it didn't actually hit well with fans or audiences because it missed the entire point of the genre they try to copy again, which was it was all live action. That's what made it cool. But it did actually have a decent story. Hell, it's actually probably one of the most unique stories with the Digimon IP since Digimon World Ds Squad. And that's saying something because it was 15 years apart between these two IPs. But the games I'm going to be talking about in this segment are the DS games. The trilogy, per se. Okay, so Digimon World DS, the original one, actually was decent. It was another overly... they actually went back to the Digimon World 2 idea, which was... have it be very grindy, and the whole point was to grind, de-evolve, and re-evolve your Digimon and grind more, and then become strong enough to take on these super bosses, which were roadblocks that forced you to grind exorbitant amounts. But the other thing is it also brought in somewhat of a staple of the series, Digifarms, which are essentially Pokebanks, but actually a more accurate depiction from what the anime showed. Professor Oak would just have Ash's Pokemon just roaming free in an open field, pet them, take care of them, not in the Pokeballs. Essentially, it was that. And the so it also sent a couple of mixed messages. Why are you giving me all this shit to make my bench seat warmer Digimons and other monsters. So why are you making me, giving me the option to pour all these resources into making my bench warmers better? And the reason why was to help you fill out the Digidex. No, it's a rip off the Pokédex. It's just the library of every Digimon you have ever had in your possession. Even Digivolutions that you de-digivolved from. And it was, I mean, it's actually a pretty respectable experience, in my opinion, for a DS game. But it doesn't have anything on Monsters Quest Monsters. I mean, Dragon Quest Monsters DS. But then the other two games, which they decided to rip off Pokemon by splitting up the game into two different games and having version exclusive Digimon in each one. And when I mean version exclusive Digimon, I actually mean area exclusives. But everything of these games was the exact fucking same beyond that and a slightly redubbed story. Story was, I mean, is actually shit even for Digimon video game standards. And it's milquetoast in writing at best. And the fact that it's so overwhelmingly bland and forgettable that your memorizations of it might actually be more eventful than the actual game itself. But it also gave a reason for giving you all these resources to booster up your bench seat warmers. And the fact that now you can DNA Digivolve Digimon. And for Digimon that didn't have a Digivolution variant for the combination and also didn't meet the invisible criterias, you could fuse your bench seat warmers with your active party to make your active party stronger and increase the maximum level cap of your Digimon, which is good. I actually welcome that change. I know that change, but the problem with this trilogy is they literally recycled all the assets from the previous game, and they also only had, I think, 8 months to make Digimon World DS. And then they were given a time frame of using all the resources they had from the previous game to make not one but 2 games in 3 months. At least it was a better deal than Digimon World 4 had. But a lot of them aren't, I know. So at the end of the day, Digimon video games back then were really shit. But the new ones, Digimon Story, for example, are actually some of the best Digimon games ever made. And you can buy the HD version on Steam for not 1, but 2 games. For the price of 1. No, not even that. Half off. Half off of a traditional AAA game. $30, not for 1 game, but 2 games. Each with more than 24 hours of story gameplay. Not including a harder mode and New Game Plus you can unlock by beating the story. And cross-game Digimon transfer? meaning you can transfer Digimon between the game files without manipulation of data or a second copy of the game. Sign me up, Scotty. Oh, and my only gripe is they didn't put in the English dub from the original adaptation of the American PSP games because everyone unanimously agreed that it was shit. But hey, person who has a hard time reading text, period, would have welcomed it anyway. But the story is actually pretty good. It also has a very unique gameplay style. And I heavily recommend it. I recommend going into it blind. You can also get it on Nintendo Switch. And I think PlayStation 4 now. Xbox maybe. But PC, if you ask me, is where it's at. No, really. Over the years, I think PC, even by today's standards, is far better than console. Unless you're talking Nintendo. Everyone loves Nintendo. And Nintendo only releases Nintendo on Nintendo. So, yeah. And hell, some of the most memorable games of all time were actually Nintendo titles. And or the most unique ever made. Like Pikmin. Yeah, that's actually a really good game. I highly recommend it. But we're not doing reviews of random shit this episode. So now is the part of the video where I explain all the criteria to 100% the game. And how much fucking torture it will be. And I hope you will like to watch it. Hell, I heavily recommend you share it. Please, I only have 3 viewers. And all 3 of them appear to be tired of my bullshit. And I'm not complaining or anything, but hey, I would like more viewers. So, now we pretty much ended off pretty much all the conversational points I had in the original series. And I'm just going to recap the 100% list of the series. Completing the card collection catalog, which is literally is probably going to be the easiest on the list because it literally is a byproduct of gratuitous grinding, which is necessary in this game. Number 3, unlocking all the characters. And number 2, unlocking all the playable characters. Which requires cryptic, grindy bullshit along with a fistful of game guides or an actual copy of the game manual of the game. I mean, the gamer's book. They actually made a book of this game. For this game, they made a book. But it was custom order. And there's only so many of them still in circulation. I looked it up. There's only 2. And they're both going for about the price of a college textbook. Or free. You could go the free option, which I might, because I have an app that reads it to me. And number 3, getting all of them to max level, as well as appropriate thematic gear for each one. And that is also mostly going to be a byproduct of grinding, because literally I'm going to have to grind all of them to max level, and that will produce the resources to thematically equip them. But I also need to thematically equip them with the best. Yeah, that's a later problem. Beat every game difficulty. Yes, there's multiple difficulties in this game, because they thought the original experience wasn't shitty enough. They had to expand upon it by making you do the entire thing, not once, but five times. Or is it 3? I'm going semi blind. I'm literally going off of resources from memory from when I try to 100% this game. And I'm definitely going to look up walkthroughs of how to do all of the quests, because even all of the LPs I remember watching said, okay, I tried to do this 15 fucking times and then I looked it up. Turns out there's hidden cryptic bullshit everywhere. Go here. Yeah, there's a hidden room here. Kill that spawner. And kill... but there's a secret room inside this secret room that leads to Digimon. And we need to kill all the fucking Digimon in this entirety zone within a specific time limit. So if we stay stagnant in one area too long, we're going to fuck ourselves over and have to do it all over again from the beginning. Yeah, cryptic, archaic bullshit. Which is so cryptic, you would need a walkthrough to know that half of the shit actually was shit. Next on the list, unlocking all of the Metal Edamon shop items. And number 6, if I'm, wait, no, 7, I think I'm on 7 now. Number 7, doing all, and unlocking all the characters on the start menu. Yes, there's a different criteria for that. Next. Max upgrading chips. I max upgrade one of every chip in the game. Which is going to require data. Data is something you get from killing shit. Killing shit occurs from gratuitous grinding, which I'm going to have to max out 15 Digimon, 4 of which are just better versions of the ones you start with. The rest they decided to throw in because reasons. Oh, that, and then some of them actually made the back of the box more badass, and that's why they put them in. Uh, and I think that's it for the list here. Besides completing the story 3 to 5 times, but that's for the difficulty. And that's the end of this Episode 5 Glitch. Alright, so this is the point of the game where it actually gets interesting. So far, previously in the other clips, we only been doing small dungeons and or just grinding to actually accomplish things we need to do in the game. So, if memory serves correct, this was actually done in a separate section of the others. I also explained why I refer to sections in chapter 2 a lot. But hopefully from after chapter 1 and 2, I'm done ranting about old topics that I heavily explained in those episodes. So, we need to beat what I call the fake end dungeon. Because it looks like the end dungeon, but it's not. Hell, actually, I think it's one of the shortest dungeons in the game. And it's actually has a very unique and memorable layout. And it is probably the most iconic of all the dungeons in the game, considering all of the other dungeons in the game after this point, and the big dungeons, are heavily polished marble digital-esque environments, which are heavily futuristic modern, with shitty Super Pros crossbows here and there. But the thing is that this game lacks a lot of is in-game world dialogue and story. What I mean by that is little bits here and there that suggest that this world is alive and that things live in it. But this entire game is literally can be chalked up to safe zone and dungeon area. And yes, there are NPCs here in the safe area that move around and stuff, but they don't have any complicated dialogue. And they're just there to make the place look more busy and less empty. But the only thing that would make this dungeon more memorable, and how it's actually very memorable, because it is actually one of the best grinding spots in the game for World 1. And there's a total of 4 worlds. Death Valley, which is this, which, like I explained in the chapter 2, I recorded this after chapter 2's commentary. It doesn't feel like a valley. That's the summary. Hell, it probably feels more like a canyon or a ravine than a valley. But more is spoken about that in the next episode. But yeah. Uh, so the other problem with the design philosophy in this game and why it's so milquetoast is actually the fact that the music is better than what this game is. Every Digimon video game always manages to nail the sound, the music. I guarantee you, at a blind test, you can take any Digimon video game music and have someone listen to it, and for them to not point out the exact game it came from, but the fact it came from a Digimon video game. I can guarantee you that. Because it sort of made its own genre. Hell, in my opinion, it probably was some of the first mainstream dubstep ever made. That's non-lyrical, of course. But a lot of it's computery noise. You know, obviously digital noise. Also, this little bit's a bit of a pointless foreshadowing. And in my opinion, probably a little world breaking at that as well. Because it implies that the desert is close to that place, and to the Death Valley. But the rest of the game doesn't actually make this connection, because that point that it's foreshadowing to is not actually connected to the desert. It's connected to a segment in between the desert, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to spoil that, because that's an episode 2 problem. I mean, chapter 2 problem. So, I also go a rant about of how boring the enemy design is in this game in chapter 2. Oh, so the basic story of what happens in the beginning of the game, besides the fact you get thrown into a world with literally only a 1 damage beat stick, customary to what character you picked, which you're literally going to replace within the first 15 seconds of the actual game after the tutorial. Is that you were created, your avatar was created by Apocrymon, who sends you in to this place because a different search team they sent disappeared. So they created you, give you very minimal, I mean, they don't give you any resources to do this, so literally you're self-funded. You're forced to do this or you die. Oh, and you do die a lot. But you're given immortality. But you're sent here to find Leomon, bring him back, learn that the server they found, called the Yatamo server, is heavily infested with hostiles, and that you need to go into the deep of it and bring back all of the digi-elves that were lost in that encampment that was sent to an unknown place as an exploration team and archaeology group. None of them were actually prepared for combat. Oh, hell, the Digi-Elves actually make better hostages than they do anything else. And the Digi-Elf is literally the only Digimon in the game. I mean, literally the only non-Digimon in the entire series of Digimon, unless you count the couple of Digimon that aren't really Digimon. Oh yeah, this is the part of the series I actually try to put in some memes here and there to try and liven it up. But a design choice I found out after literally 2 hours of recording, getting to the front of the dungeon, because I wanted to know what this one switch does, because I always instinctively turned it on whenever I found it. And then I found out, oh, you have to be fucking me. It's literally a switch that turns on the front gate to the end dungeon, which you would only find out if you didn't turn on the fucking switch at the beginning of the level. And had to literally do the entire track all over again. Oh yeah, that bit. The Rick and Morty switch bit. So yeah, this bit's becoming more of a director's commentary from the looks of it. But this bit is actually probably the funniest without memes, to break it up. Also, I think this is the bit where I started to do post commentary as well. Wait, no, I didn't. It was live commentary, but I on the editing table put in those bits. I remember now. To try and make it less boring, but it failed. Oh yeah, this is the part where I literally backtrack all the way back to the Switch, forgetting that I turned on the Switch, but went back to go make sure, because I wasn't going to waste another hour and a fucking half getting to the end of the dungeon to find out I didn't turn on the fucking Switch. Why is this a fucking mechanic? I have all the fucking keys. Just let me get in the dungeon. I worked for this. I earned this. Let me move on. And that's this game in a sentence there. Also, there's these little bibs and blobs hidden around the place to give you a little bit more backstory, but they all pretty much sum up. Well, entrance log. We managed to find out a way to survive here. Oh shit. Some of us are starting to turn on each other because we're being possessed by something. Help us. Oh fuck, I forgot my gas mask. Oh no. I'm dying of poison. Yeah. There's... Yeah, pretty much it's mostly a warning. I mean, most of them warn you about something, or just give you a vague hindrance of, there's probably something bad this way. You know, like a bad omen type feel. Oh, this motherfucking segment. I fucking hate this segment. It's the fucking boat segment again. I really, really hate this segment. After what it did to me in chapter 2. Oh. Oh. uh. uh. It's actually really fucking hilarious. I recommend watching this episode to the end and then starting up on episode 2 and chapter 2. So, yeah, if memory serves correct, I actually got for the boat segment first try. If I remember correct. No, it doesn't look like it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that bit. Fuck you, missile. Okay. So, uh, they put in a hand. Oh, I did make it first try. Yeah, I explained why I was having so much difficulty in chapter 2. I won't hear, but that makes it look a fuckload more easier than what it was. Oh, but it wasn't my first try. I remembered. I remembered something I forgot. That wasn't the first attempt, by the way. I actually made it all the way to this place once. Found out I needed to flip the fucking switch, then had to backtrack to flip the fucking switch and then start over from the beginning of the run. I decided to cut out the previous bit because the episode was already getting too long, even when that bit was at 100% speed. So it's on the cutting room table and floor somewhere. Probably have it on a disc. Yeah, I burnt it onto a disc. But it's not. I literally don't do anything in that segment besides. Hell, I didn't even pick up anything. So, besides money. Well, that's the end of the segment. Episode 6. I don't have to do it again. Okay, attempt 2 recording this segment. Still learning a bit of the editing software as this built-in voiceover feature, but if it gets to the end of the video, it corrupts the audio file it recorded, and I literally recorded this entire 40-minute segment of dialogue. So, I also talked about the downsides of multiplayer in this game in that segment, but I'm going to have to do it all over again. So a lot of this game is actually made to be played in co-op, but a lot of the design choices and or limitations of the consoles actually prevented from being multiplayer. For example, you see how much of the screen the character takes up. It's about 15% of the screen. But in multiplayer, everyone shares the same screen, so each of them are taking up this big piece of the big chunk of the screen real estate, and they all have to cooperate into moving into the same direction. But if one of your people in the party is really wants to be trolly, you can just stop moving at any time. Oh, in load zones, the last person to get to the load zone barrier gets to pick yes, I want to go there, or no. So, and if you do choose to play co-op in this game, I heavily recommend item duping. because the most active player will get all the items, and the least active doesn't, and the most active just starves everyone else. Or alternatively, everyone grinds on their own time and then they come together to play the game and progress for the story. Also, this dungeon is very milquetoast in design and very forgettable. And a lot of the dungeons in this game you can get easily turned around because they literally copy and paste the same handful of rooms over and over again. So it's really easy to get lost in these dungeons, not because they're made to be mazes, but because they're made to be mazes that every room looks exactly alike. And hell, with how these dungeons are built, you would think there was a random number generation to these dungeons. But no, they were just lazily made. And looking at it, a lot of the dungeons in this game look like it was made by the Into the Gungeon map designer, which is pretty much a feat because it means he either was pressed for time so much that you had to cut corners in designing the game, or that your dungeon looks so generic it looks like it was shot out by a random number generator. But yeah, this dungeon is probably the most mazy of all the dungeons in the game. And hell, a lot of literally every world has its own flavor of dungeon. In Death Valley, a lot of them are just milquetoast, very little character. Especially in the endgame dungeon for the zone, which is this one. And the Doom Dome is probably the most iconic of the area. And I noticed this about the tile set design re-watching a lot of the footage of this game, of me editing it. You don't notice it in gameplay too much because, well, a lot of this game's forgettable even when you're playing it. Hell, I actually played this game when watching other shows. For example, the entirety of this first segment, these first episodes here, I was actually watching Digimon Season 4 in the background. Alright, I was just checking to see how much longer I had. About 30 more minutes of commentary. But all the problems in this game can pretty much be summed up to the creators didn't have enough time to develop what they wanted to, and or they were forced to, and it's actually a really good example of shitty AAA game tactics. And a lot of AAA game companies were pretty much prone to this. You know, just cranking out game after game till the point they realize, oh, wait a minute, this isn't good for longevity. Look at Nintendo. They just crank out good game after good game, and they make billions. When we crank out mediocre and shitty games every week, and we're doing real shitty. I wonder why. Oh, it's because people want quality in their games. And then EA shat its pants when they found out they can just throw microtransactions in and pay-to-win tactics in a pay-to-play game like FIFA. I don't like... see, there's good things with in some games and bad things, but my opinion, games obviously made to cater to the weak-minded individuals, those with gambling problems and other, or encourage gambling problems and other, are probably the most despicable games ever created by man. And that's saying something when there's literal blatant rip-offs or movie tie-ins which are made last minute, have very little quality whatsoever, and those games actually sort of died out recently. But the thing is, what Digimon World 4 gets correct in its accomplishments is it sort of utilized the you get better in stats by using stats strategy of leveling. I said sorta. The more you use magic, the more magic you get. But like I explained in Chapter 2, it's more of an illusion, if anything. So, like I was saying, a lot of this game is just poorly made. Oh, but something I will say is, looking back at the footage and everything, this isn't something I noticed in gameplay, but every world has its own unique design for levels. I mean, for dungeons. For example, a lot of the endgame dungeons sort of follow the futuristic, polished, clean dungeon tile sets, when the smaller dungeons sort of follow the dirty and grungy feel. But each dungeon, not every dungeon has its unique distinguisher. Just dungeons in specific areas do. For example, all of the dungeons in this zone look grungy, but they don't look sandy or dusty. But in World 2, they do. And hell, in World 3, the Venom Swamp, they actually make a lot of the dungeons feel swampy or jungly. And, I'd almost not feel like a dungeon in those areas. But they did manage to actually put unique tile set designs and textures for all of the dungeons. And that is something to say as an improvement over Digimon World 2. Yes, you, World 2, probably one of the most forgettable dungeons designs ever conceived. So now we fight Apocrymon. Oh, and this is the part where underleveled and we get instantly owned. But what you want to do is you want to kill the maces there, held up by DNA strands. And then that will unlock Apocrymon. And that will allow you to kill Apocrymon and damage him for real. And he's immortal until you break all of these pedestals. But he can knock you back into the taser floor. And he also randomly erupts in fire, which is bad because Duramon is actually heavily allergic to fire. But his blowback attack counts as ice, which Duramon is resilient to. So once you break his pedestals, you start spamming the stun lock ability, which if you're not too careful can actually one-shot you if you get yourself in the middle of it. Guess what? Grinding montage. Till I'm level 20s. And the thing is, in in chapter 1, I kind of undergrinded a lot because I underestimated how much I needed to grind and overestimated the character, mostly because I was thinking, oh, maybe the bosses are easier if you dodge some of their attacks, and then you wouldn't need to grind as much. But after seeing Apocrymon's homing AoE attack and died to it, and the fact he spams it every 3 seconds, well, there's no feasible way to dodge it at all unless you tank it. So that's what I ended up doing. Because like I said, in co-op in this game is shit. Mostly because every time I try to play it, and many times I heard other people play it, it ended up into a fist fight. Because the player character takes up about 15% of the screen real estate. So, and then when you have multiple players, they all take up the same amount of space, and the camera follows all of them. It centers on all the positions of all of them. And the camera will refuse to move unless all the players are headed in the same direction. So not only is the co-op bad, but not only is the game bad and heavily revolvent around co-op, but the co-op and game limitational designs actually hamper its ability to be a good co-op game, because it pretty much gimps itself because it can only show so much on the screen at any given time, and it can't have the players freely move throughout an area. But if they did allow the players to do so, it would actually make the players realize how small the game is. So by zooming in the camera like they did gives an illusion that the game is bigger. Oddity. I mean, it's one of those pick upable enigmas. If you slow down the character speed and zoom in a lot, or zoom out a lot, you can actually give the illusion that your game world is bigger due to travel time. But it isn't viable, especially in small games. So, yeah. Oh, I'm also saving up expensively modded weapons for later, because that makes leveling easier if weapons do extra damage. Modular damage. And it will make it easier to level up certain Digimon later on. But you could cash it in for big stonks. But the reason why I didn't is because it usually costs 3 times as much as what you can get off of it to get another one exactly like it. So by saving it for later until I need it, I save more money over time, because then when I'm done with it with another character, I can sell it. And there's going to be a lot of grinding after chapter 4, I can tell you that. Because I plan to do all the grinding in installments for all the characters. Oh, that, and I need to unlock them. Well, I actually might do that in between chapter 3 and 4. Because I definitely know the entirety of chapter 3 might be a complete chapter. But now thinking about it, collecting the last of the Digi-Elves and doing all the side quests could be its own separate video if I also include a grinding montage of all of the Digimon and get them to the same level I have Duramon at. And okay, so now we're going to continue with the commentary here. Sorry if I'm slowing down any or sounding tired. It's because it's getting real late. Oh, I'm also saving up B Magnum A's and B's, because I do remember there being a side quest that requires you to get one, but it's bugged because you can't actually get the item in the area that you need to go to. So I know, but it also locks you in there until you find it, which you can't in difficulty 1 because it doesn't drop in difficulty 1. So you need to carry it on your person before you go into that quest, and just give it to him as soon as you enter the zone. Alrighty, now I'm making my way back to the dungeon again. Oh, this is also around the point in previous recording this. I actually ranted on how Zelda managed to get this right. And that was on, Zelda Ocarina of Time on the N64. It allowed you to unlock alternate paths in a dungeon, like pushing a crate off of a cliff, and then you can use the crate to jump up the cliff and then enter half of the dungeon and the second half of the dungeon as sort of a checkpoint, because you spawn at the beginning of the dungeon when you die, and you can just climb up there and just continue on with the other half of the dungeon. Well, in this game, you just pretty much have to start over from the beginning. So if you die in a dungeon, you start over from the beginning. But basic gameplay design was established in Zelda on the N64, and they couldn't even get that right. Yes, the game is rushed, but a basic checkpoint system is already in the game. If you fail a platform, you spawn literally right there. So you can't tell me that they couldn't fucking implement checkpoint systems in a dungeon in the time they had allotted. And the reason why I'm a little harsh on this game is because it was sold as a full title, a fully complete game, but it's by any means not finished at all. And that as a video gamer and advocate of getting your money's worth for a game, at the time, I would agree this was not $60 worth of material. Hell, I would say $20 at best. And that's the price of the typical indie game. Because it feels like there should be an update to finish the game, and it's not finished yet, blah, blah, blah. But as companies sort of realized making a ton of shitty games is far less lucrative than making a small handful of good games. And that brings us to the end of this recording segment. Right about... Oh, wait a minute. I faff around with the inventory for 5 minutes. Because one of my major gripes of this game is the fact that it's literally 80% inventory management. Your bag's full. You have to go empty it. Oh, now you have a lot of money because you sold a lot of stuff. Now you have to put that money in the bank, or else when you die, you lose it. Oh, I also managed to collect a mystery item, which you take to a Pacific NPC, give him money, and it's 90% guaranteed to be less money, and worth less money than what you paid to identify it. Also, it's a level 1 mystery item. So, and it's a tier 1 mystery item. So, it's going to be a slightly better version of something off the ground. and it wasn't. I already, I think I have it recorded when I talked about how data works. But you can use data to upgrade your base stats, and your level ups are all based off of a percentile on the base stats of a character. So if you increase the base stat, it could turn into a shitload of extra stats. But since there's 15 characters in the game, it's best recommended not to do that at all. Unless you have the character that you really want to keep playing as. And that's the end of chapter 1. See you guys next time. Please like, subscribe, and share with other people. Please. This is how the channel gets to grow. Please.